Hey, folks, good evening and welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. Thanks for joining me. I want to welcome all new listeners and members to the channel, and as well as first timers in the chat. So, are time travel theories credible? Are UFOs used by evolved humans from the future who want to change or manipulate history? People from the future know that they have had a long evolutionary history on this planet. Obviously, our technology will become more advanced in the future, and people from the future certainly want to preserve the chances to get to this step of our human evolution. They certainly want to preserve their own time and control their own destiny. Now, some theories state that evolved humans are operating UFOs returning to our time. They would time travel to gather information in a manner impossible with today's technology. Now, some claim that the supposed time travelers are trying to save us from ourselves. Now, documents released in recent years reveal that time travel and anti-gravity technology could be possible, and that it was part of priority research inside secret U.S. programs. So could this secret technology be harnessed by humans to visit other worlds at other times? Now, these documents were obtained as part of a Freedom of Information request into the ATEP program, which is the Pentagon's supposed secret UFO program. Now, one file described how to use anti-gravity technology to produce spacecraft. It stated that the effects can be implemented by manipulating space-time. Now, reports stated that there is research on different ways of controlling gravity. This concept might be possible to produce exotic phenomena such as faster than light travel and time machines. Now, I believe that if time travel becomes a reality, these future humans will move through time and space using wormholes or portals, not necessarily with the use of specialized craft. Now, do you think that this could be possible? Should we give credence to this theory? Even if there were technically possible, we might keep in mind that changing the past means changing our present. So would we benefit from that? Well, let's get started off with this brief report. A possible alternate being is reported by the witnesses who was extremely frightened by the feeling of evil that was overwhelming. Then it suddenly vanished. The witness states, "I had a disturbing experience when I was younger. My family was on a day trip by car and we stopped at a fast food restaurant to eat in San Diego, California. We walked in and immediately I was overcome with a sense of extreme dread and fear. I soon noticed a man eating by himself. He was pale-skinned and wearing a white pullover shirt. He also had on a yellow knitted cap. The hair was sticking out of it as if he had been wearing it for a long period of time. I was extremely frightened with the feeling of evil that was overwhelming. His looks didn't alarm me, but his aura was ominous. I immediately lost my appetite because of my sense of terror. I couldn't help but look over at this man. He was also moving very slowly and deliberately. As I looked closer, his fingernails were long and bluish in color. His eyes were black, which stood out against his pale skin. I tried to get my parents to notice, but they continued talking. Apparently, no one else was picking up this vibration of malevolence. Eventually, I abruptly interrupted their conversation and said, "Look at that man over there," while nodding in his direction. My father turned and said, "Which man?" That quickly, the strange man had disappeared. There was no trace of it. I had only taken my eyes off of him for a few seconds. He just simply vanished. I still felt his presence. In fact, I felt like he was near me for the rest of that day. I have never had that same feeling since that day, but I know I have seen the same strange man on several occasions. I truly believe that he was there and that he somehow disappeared into an alternate realm. Also, I think that he continues to do so. Could he be sending me or others messages? Well, that's kind of the gist of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So let's go ahead and get started with the show.
We live in a reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
So before I go any further, I want to mention that this channel is made possible by you clicking on the subscribe and like buttons and by you sharing our programming. Super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated. You can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. Now, the Buy Me a Coffee link is also shown below. Thanks for your consideration. Now, your comments are always welcome. Tell me which accounts you find interesting in the presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. I want to again thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Thomas, and Mike, for their commitment to me and the channel. Now, if you're in the chat and you have a question, please use all caps, and I'll try to get to each one after the presentation. Now, the following account is of a strange experience that occurred to a mother of the submitter when she was 5 years old, along with her family in the winter of 1957. She states, the incident was the picking up of hitchhikers that may or may not have been human. The incident bears some similarities to accounts of phantom hitchhikers, but goes much further to suggest that they were real flesh and blood beings. My mother and her family, which consisted of her parents and older sister, lived between the cities of Reidsville and Greensboro in North Carolina. One day they had an errand in Reidsville, and on their way, they saw an older couple walking on the opposite side of the road. A couple of hours later, leaving Reidsville on their way home, they saw the same couple in the same spot heading in that same direction as before, almost as if they had been walking on a treadmill, having gained no ground at all. They pulled up and asked if they needed a lift, and they said that they were trying to get to Greensboro to the bus station. Now, my grandfather agreed to take them there, but first, they would have to go home to be there on time to pick up their oldest daughter from the school bus near their house. Now, once inside the car, it became painfully obvious that these folks were poorly dressed for cold, icy weather. The woman was wearing a summer dress and sandals, and the man a shirt and bib overalls and shoes along with a brimmed hat. My mother, being a small child, sat between her parents in the front seat, but turned around facing the couple, staring at the strangers as children would do, taking in their appearance. The one thing that stood out in her mind was the man's piercing, beautiful blue eyes. The man reached into his pocket and handed her a red pencil with Coca-Cola written on it. When they reached home, it was decided that they would have lunch with the couple, who said they were the Bradleys, before they drive to Greensboro. Now, considering their clothing, my grandmother decided to give them some more appropriate winter clothing and coats and shoes for the woman who had on sandals. My grandmother also decided to pack them snacks and sandwiches for their trip. Now, with their guests well fed and with warmer clothes and snacks, everyone piled into the car to take them to Greensboro. Halfway on their trip, the Bradleys insisted that they needed to be left off on a bridge on old U.S. Highway 29. My grandfather protested, saying no, they would likely not get another ride, and it being winter, it would be getting dark soon, and insisted on carrying them the whole way there. But they said no, they must be left off at the bridge. A sort of back and forth occurred between my grandfather and the Bradleys, with them asking to please be let off at the bridge. Now, unable to change their mind, he obliged and stopped the car. They opened the door and got out and immediately disappeared, leaving the door still open. My grandfather was horrified, jumping out of the car, looking to see if they had fallen on the ice out of his view. But they were nowhere to be found. He looked all about and called for them, but nothing but silence. The whole area was clear as far as he could see, but there was nothing there. He got back into the car with his family, severely upset and confused as to what had happened, as was everyone else. Frantically, they drove up and down the road looking for them, wondering if they somehow had gotten another ride, trying to rationalize the obviously spectacular disappearance of the Bradleys. After a fruitless search, they drove back home confused as to what had occurred. This made a huge impression on my mother, having distinctly remembered the incident all her life. So the question remains, who were the Bradleys? Were they ghosts? But ghosts don't stay all afternoon with you and eat lunch. Furthermore, when they disappeared, the clothes given to them disappeared as well. Even the sandwiches that were packed for them. This suggests that they were solid beings. Also, why did they insist on being let off the bridge, saying it must be done? Was it some sort of portal or gateway home? The whole thing remains a mystery. Now, this next account, a New Yorker was driving home from Baltimore, Maryland on I-83 North. When they were near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the truck in front of them had vanished, and they were 50 miles or so still in Maryland. Dear Lon, I've been debating with myself on sending this to you, but the small article you have about one person's lost time is making me take the plunge. It happened back in March of 1995. I traveled from upstate New York down to Baltimore, Maryland for a weekend conference. Now, I was on my way home, had negotiated the nasty interchanges around Baltimore very nicely, and was approaching Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Now, the sun was low in the sky off to my left, and I was listening to a radio station that suddenly became full of static. I took my eyes off the road for about 1 second just to find the button for the radio to search for another station automatically. I looked up, and the tractor trailer I had been following, he was about a quarter mile ahead of me, was gone. Then I realized it was dark, and suddenly I was crossing from Pennsylvania into Maryland again. I was less than calm. I took the next exit off the highway, instantly ended up on a rural road, and spent another half hour finding a town. Thankfully, it was a Pizza Hut, so I went in and ordered dinner. It was nearly 9 p.m. I'm certain the waitstaff thought I was delusional, higher because I couldn't remember the name of the town, which they had to keep telling me. To this day, I don't remember what the name of the town was. I called my sister, terrified and not quite hysterical, telling her what happened. I lost 4 to 5 hours and was still 4 hours from home, but had enough gas to get home. She was sure I had merely gotten lost, but to this day, even though she fully believes in extraterrestrials, tells me I got lost that afternoon. No, I did not. I don't think about it often, but when I do, the stress it brings with it is rather intense. So I might as well write about it while I'm stressing as just sit and fret. I made it home without incident in the normal period, again without having to stop for more. I don't drink. I've never done drugs, and I've always believed in the paranormal. Nothing like that has happened since, and I've done a fair amount of traveling between then and now. So I don't know what happened. I have no memory, no flashes, no dreams, just the recurrent terror of the moment it went from sundown to 9 p.m. Say, a woman was driving home at night after visiting her father in rehab. She then experienced a possible time glitch or possibly entered a vortex. She states, my father was in a rehabilitation center for physical therapy following triple bypass heart surgery. The rehab was 2 towns away from my house. One night when I was leaving the rehab, I took a longer route home because it was more brightly lit. The shorter route was dark with no streetlights, and I didn't like traveling that route after dark. So I was driving the longer and brightly lit route when a car in front of me pulled to the side of the road and let me pass by. But strangely, as soon as I passed the car, it immediately pulled out and began following me closely with high beams. Just then, I crossed the border into the next town. There are many stores, restaurants, and a hotel in that area, so the lights are even brighter there. But suddenly, everything on the road went black, and I heard a sound like an overhead garage door closing. Bang! I found myself driving on a pitch-black, narrow road with no lights and no car following me. I was not on the same road that I had been traveling. I began talking out loud to myself. What the hell? Where the hell am I at? What has happened? It was then that I realized that my headlights were shining on a street sign up ahead. It said Gale Road. Gale Road was the dark shortcut route that I absolutely did not take when I left the rehab center. I found myself almost all the way back to the rehab, though I had already reached the next town while driving home. Now, I had to repeat the drive, but this time I had to take the other pitch black route home, the route that I didn't want to drive at night in the first place. My father always calls me when I get home. He knew the trip back home took me about 40 minutes. But I began thinking that this time he was going to wonder what was taking me so long to get home. I never looked at the time, but I assumed that whatever happened, it must have taken me almost the whole way back to where I started, would have added at least an hour to my trip, maybe longer. And when I finally got home, the phone rang. It was my father, and before I told him what had happened, I apologized for taking so long to get home. I asked him how many times he had tried to call. First, silence on the other end, and then my father said, "Well, this is the first time I'm calling. It's only been about a half hour. You're not late." It was then that I explained to him what had happened to me. But I had no clue what had happened. A vortex in the road, did the car that pulled out in front of me and then proceed to follow me have something to do with what happened to me next? Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? So a group of teen friends are exploring a wooded area in Staffordshire, England, when they come upon an old stone public house with a thatched roof. Now, after that, things get interesting. The witness states, "I was 15 and living in the small town in Staffordshire, England. It was a sunny, warm Sunday afternoon with nothing much to do. My girlfriend and two neighbor boys, a couple of years older than we were, decided to go for a walk. No romance, just friends. We walked for a few miles along the riverbank, and we were feeling jolly, but soon felt rather hot and thirsty. We came to a small wooded area and decided to explore that in the cool of the trees. We came out of the woods into the clearing where there was an old stone public house, low roofed and thatched, which was unusual where we lived. It had a wooden bench outside. We sat there for a minute, counted our pennies, and found that we could go in and get a drink of some sort. The boys decided on beer, so we went. I remembered vividly the wood plank floor, the small pane windows with sunlight streaming through, and a lot of dust in the air, which gave the interior a mist-like greenish atmosphere. I also remember that two men were sitting on the crude bench beside the thick wooden table. One old man with a pipe was sitting with a huge fireplace and a roaring fire. And I thought it odd since, if you have a fire on, going on a warm day. The boys went to the bar and asked for a beer and lemonade. The barman just stared at them as if they were speaking a foreign language. He just stood with his mouth open, opening a metal tankard in his hand and not moving. The boys looked around and one of them pointed to a small cask at the bar. "Can we have 4 ciders then, please?" he said. The barman seemed dazed or ill, but didn't know which, but he took 4 battered tin pots down from the hook above his head and poured out the cider. One of the boys asked how much. The barman shook his head and waved us away. We quickly drank the cider. It was very strong and no doubt illegal for us. but we put the cups on the bar, said thank you, and left. The other men who were there never looked at us nor made eye contact. The whole place was very basic, quaint, but we were in rural England after all. I can't remember there being a name on the pub. It was only one or two small rooms with a low roof, large oak beams, 2 windows, and a door. We felt refreshed and we made our way back home. Now, the following week, again, it was a lovely summer's day and we were playing a ball game when we thought we'd go back for another walk and have some illicit cider. After we went, off we went. We walked for miles almost to the next town, but we found neither the small wood or this little pub. We searched the area for several weekends until time was go back to the school. We never even found any ruins or stones or stumps to show that there had been a pub there or even a wood at one time. I even went to the library to see if there was anything like that on old maps, but I never found a thing. So where had we been that sunny Sunday afternoon? We'll never know. This was 45 years ago, and I've never told anyone about this before. Now, is this possible time slip? Did these kids pass through a wormhole, a vortex? Time travel? Intriguing story. Now, a Saskatchewan man had a bizarre and unexplained experience after his friend called him demanding to know why he had left her alone at home, which was 400 miles away. And he states to me, I've got a story for you and I don't know what it is. Time travel, time slip, I don't know. My friend lives 400 miles away from me. She's a girl, but it's nothing romantic. I was at home in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and had a couple glasses of wine. I fell asleep on the couch watching a football game. So I woke up about 2:30 a.m. because a dog jumped on me and wanted to go outside and do her business. So I did that and then went back to bed. I got a phone call about 7 o'clock in the morning from my friend Rhonda, and she said to me, "Why did you leave me without telling me where you were going?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And then she said, "You were here last night, remember?" And I said, "What?" She said, "I was sitting in my kitchen crying because she and her boyfriend had broken up. And you spent the night comforting me." I said, "Rhonda, I'm at home. I'm 400 miles away." She said, No, you're pulling my leg. Now I'm mad at you. You're telling me you don't believe me and you were here. Anyway, she decided to move back to my home city not long after that night. And get this, I walked into her house to help her pack. And when I stepped into her house, and I'd never been there before, it was like, oh my God, I've been here before. Every hair on my body stood at attention. It was like somebody dumped cold water on me. And get this, she even said to me, "Don't you remember that at about 2:30 a.m. you had to take Jess, your dog, out to do their business?" So I don't know what it was all about. Was it a ghost story or time travel? And Rhonda and I have talked about this ever since. It's like we are scared to talk about it because it both sends shivers up and down our spines. Now, in this next account, an Alabama man is visiting his sister in Roan Mountain, Tennessee. While out at night exploring, he had a traumatic close encounter with a huge Bigfoot. But then the creature disappeared. Now, he states to me, the only person I've ever told this to was my wife at the time, now my ex. She laughed and accused me of making it up. Before I get to my encounter, I'll give you a little backstory. I was born in Mobile, Alabama in 1964. Up until the mid-20s, I'd never been on any higher ground than a couple hundred feet above sea level. In the mid-'80s, early 90s, my sister got married and moved to Roan Mountain in eastern Tennessee. My wife and I took a trip up there to visit for a week. Now, after the first few days of running around and seeing the sights, we spent the day just hanging out at the house. This led to a few cold beverages being consumed and the grill getting fired up that evening. Later that night, around 9 p.m., I went out on the back porch to get another beer. That's when I noticed about a half dozen deer about 100 yards out in the field behind the house. One had a nice rack, and I couldn't make out how many number of points, so I slipped off the porch, eased over the corner of the fence, which put me about 60 to 70 yards away from them. Now, as I'm standing there against the fence watching the deer, and the big one had a minimum of 10 points, a 200 class, that's when I noticed the moon. When I say noticed, I mean noticed. It was huge and seemed to be getting closer than I'd ever seen before. Now, I've been out in the Gulf of Mexico at night and even able to witness the moon well away from any city lights. And you can see all kinds of details in the surface of the moon with the naked eye. But that night, I finally understood what the word awesome means and what awestruck means. So I'm standing at this fence watching the deer, or what's supposed to be, but can't take my eyes off this big glowing yellowish-orange ball of light that seems to be just out of reach. So after I thought around 20 minutes later, and I found out it was more like an hour, I start noticing a tickling sensation on the back of my neck. I shrugged my shoulders and turned my neck a couple of times trying to shake loose whatever it was that was tickling me, and just then a deer got spooked and bounced away. The noise finally forced me to break my gaze at the moon. That's when I noticed that I'd probably been out there long enough. So I decided to go back inside. I took one last look and mumbled a wow at the beauty of this little sun-reflected satellite that was orbiting our world, and that's when it hit me. I felt the hot breath of a huge creature hit the back of my neck at the same time as hearing or feeling the deepest chest rumbling, I've never heard before. I spied onto my right, looking over my shoulder. All I could see was black as far as my peripheral vision would allow. It was all Bigfoot. This all happened in a split second. When I got my head around far enough, I realized that my face was maybe 8 to 10 inches away from this thing's upper abdomen. Looking up, I saw this beast's pectoral muscles stuck off its chest about 6 inches and were huge. His chest was every bit 4.5 feet wide, and his shoulders were as big as basketballs, added another foot or so on each side from shoulder to shoulder. This thing was at least 6 feet apart, or 6 feet wide. I've not got a good look at his hands or face, but his arms were probably more impressive than his chest and shoulders. If Hulk Hogan had 22-inch pipe bones, this bipedal beast would have been sporting a 28 to 30-inch gun. His forearms would make Popeye jealous. His arms were covered in long, dark hair, maybe 4 to 6 inches in length. If I had to guess, this behemoth must have been around 10 feet tall and 7 to 800 pounds. As far as his face goes, from the angle in which I could make out, it had a squared-off bearded chin. I cannot see nose, eyes, ears, raised brow ridge, conical head, or nothing, so I can't say whether it looked like a man or an ape. Its arms were more like an ape's, but its chest was more human-like, just a little more hairy than most. Now, this is where the story starts getting weird. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it all happened in a split second. Now, as I spun around, it was in the process of looking up. This thing was going from a bent-over position to standing straight and taking a step back to his right. As he pulled his left leg over his right, it was like he was slipping through a slit in a green screen. I'm not sure if it was a portal or some sort of interdimensional doorway or what. All I know is that this huge thing vanished within that split second. There was no foul smell associated with this creature. There was a slight musty smell, but it reminded me of the same smell a horse gives off. I mean, you could smell it, but it was I'm not going to say it was a stench. Now, I will say this. I hear a lot of people saying that these things are evil and demons, and they may be. All I know is I got the impression that this beast was intelligent and appreciated my interest in the moon. The humph sound that was giving off made me feel the same, way I could feel when I do something good that makes my grandfather proud. He would give me that same approving that this Bigfoot did. You just never know. You just never had the same volume or power that thing did. Now, I posted a lot of strange things happening in Roan Mountain in Tennessee and North Carolina. Now, my maternal grandparents' family is from that area, and I've heard a lot of stories, personal stories about Bigfoot and a lot of strange things related to Bigfoot. So this one kind of doesn't surprise me at all. Now, this next bizarre account of a woman who took care of an elderly man next door. Now, after the man passed away, she later had an experience that suggested that the man may have been a portal traveler. Now, she states, many years ago in 1998, I believe it was, and yes, this is true. I lived next door to this elderly man who was in a wheelchair. I lived in an apartment, he lived in his house. We became friends, and I always checked in on him to see how he was doing. He had injured his leg, and because I was in the medical field, he asked if I could wound care for him, and I was glad to help. So one evening, he told me that he had an appointment at his doctor's and asked me to call him to wake him up before I went to work. I did, and he was getting ready to go to the appointment. When I got home from work that evening, I called him to see how the visit went, but there was no answer. All the lights were out in the house, and it was getting late, around 8 p.m. So I walked over there to see if he maybe had fallen. His sliding door was open, and his dog Sophie was there, but he wasn't. I looked around to see if he had an address book, anything, but no, there was nothing. I left a note giving my phone number and that I'm the neighbor, and I was concerned. The next day, I got a call. It was his family member. He had a horrific stroke at the doctor's office. He was in the hospital and wasn't expected to make it. Several days later, he passed away. So a few years later, my youngest daughter and I moved to New York. We packed all our stuff up in an APF moving van and let them haul it and drove up to New York. The first day, I didn't feel very well. I caught a cold. The next day, I was so tired and felt sick that I decided to pull over to rest. I found a motel right off the highway. The neighbor's friend who passed away had told me that he did what he did for a living for many years, and that he would drive cars across country for owners and dealerships, and he made a decent living doing so. Well, I rented a nice motel room with my youngest daughter, and I took a nap. So that evening, I went outside to meet a man staying in the next room. He looked just like my neighbor who had died, only much younger, like in his 20s. We got to chat a bit, and he said he drove cars for a living. I just couldn't keep my eyes off his face. He looked so much like my neighbor. Then at some point in the conversation, he told me about a scar he had on his leg. By golly, it was in the same exact spot that my neighbor had where I was doing the wound care for him. And this young man spoke about missing his little girl while on the road away from home. My neighbor also had a daughter, albeit an adult. I still think about my neighbor occasionally and wonder about this young man at the hotel. Was it just a coincidence? So in this next account, a man and his co-worker rented a motel room for the night. Now, when they entered, it looked like they were back in the 1960s. Then a woman in 1960s attire stepped out of the bathroom and screamed. So he tells me, in 1996, I was traveling and working in a small town in southern Ohio. It was getting late in the afternoon, so my co-worker and I decided we'd get a room in a small motel in town and do some paperwork before finding a place to eat supper. The motel was smaller, with about 30 rooms or so, and was probably built sometime in the 1950s. It was a single-floor, park-at-your-door type. Being a seasoned traveler, I always requested the room furthest away from the office traffic, so the clerk gave us the last room on the left side. The motel was shaped like an L with the office in the middle. After parking the van and gathering our things, we proceeded to the room. Upon unlocking and opening the door, the first thing that struck me was how old-fashioned the room was, straight out of the 1960s. It looked old-fashioned, but everything looked new. Just then, the door on the left rear of the door on the left rear of the room bathroom opened, and a young woman in her 20s stepped out. She was wearing what looked like clothes from the early 1960s and a hairdo to match. Seeing us two men standing there, she started to scream and frantically made her way back to the bathroom. We started apologizing and retreated out of the room. Thinking that they may have double booked the room, we returned to the office. When we explained to the clerk what had happened, his response was that there had better not be anyone in that room, and at the time there was only 3 rooms being rented out. We followed the clerk back to the room, and as he opened the door, the room was completely modern. Nobody was there. I think the clerk thought we were trying to mess with him. We stayed the night and everything was totally normal. I believe we stepped into a glitch in time that day. I often wonder if by chance some young woman was scared to death seeing a couple of strange-looking guys in a room back in the 1960s. So this next account is pretty interesting. This is something I got a while ago, but it's one of the better ones I've read over the years. All I can state is, can a rift between time and space literally open and then transport a living being into another reality? I received an interesting account that occurred in the vicinity of Baltimore, Maryland in June 1992. The information was forwarded to me by a now retired attorney who continues to live in the area. Now, at the time of the incident, he, who I refer to as MB, had a private practice for several offices in the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. metro area. He also provided pro bono legal services for the state of Maryland, particularly representing clients with mental disabilities. Now, since receiving the first email, I had 2 more conversations with MB, which were recorded with his permission. Now, I'm going to write this allegory as it was given to me. The resulting statement was approved by MB. Many of the specific and personal details will not be included for MB's confidentiality and privacy. So here's a statement. The date was that I got the whole statement and got the approval was April 5th in 2013. Now he states, in June 1992, I was assigned a pro bono case, our client, who was being housed by court order in one of the state hospitals located in the metro Baltimore area. I interviewed the client at the state hospital facility. I informed him that he was facing a weapon possession charge, since he had on him a vintage Marlin Derringer handgun and ammunition that was found in his pants pocket and other local vagrancy violations. The client told me that he went by the name Morris Winthrop. He stated that he was from New Jersey and lived most of his life in New York City. The file showed that there was no record of him residing in the state of Maryland. Now, when arrested, Morris wore a high-collar white shirt and a brown frock coat and pants. I examined the clothes. Later, I would discover that these were very similar to Victorian-era men's clothing from the 1870s to the 1880s. He also possessed a silver metal case like a cigarette case. Inside the case was a square piece of black-colored material that resembled hard plastic. He was allowed to retain this object while at the facility. Now, Morris looked to be in his early 30s, though there was no hair or stubble on his face, just thin eyebrows. He had wispy blonde hair and a very pale complexion. His eyes were very deep blue, almost violet in color. Now, during the interview, he would look directly at me and smile. He answered a few questions other than his name, that he was living in New York City, and that he didn't know how he arrived in Baltimore. Now, the physician at the hospital stated that he may be suffering from shock and there may be some memory loss. Now, I didn't get that impression while in Morris's presence. It seemed to me that he knew exactly what was transpiring. And to this day, I still do not know why I felt that way. At the end of the interview, I told him that he was being held at the facility under court order and that I would seek a hearing date. Morris's reply to me was, "Thank you for your service. I will contact you, I promise." The next day, I was contacted by the Baltimore County State Attorney's Office and informed that my services were no longer needed in this case. No further information was provided. I contacted the physician who was treating Morris. He stated that Morris was no longer at the facility. I asked where he had been taken. He told me I would need to contact the state attorney's office. For almost 2 years, no official information was available regarding Morris. So in 1994, I was approached by an attendant who had worked at that state hospital during Morris's brief stay. I was told that Morris had suddenly disappeared from the ward after his late meal. There was a thorough search conducted without results. Morris's clothes were retained by the state attorney's office. All other items, including the silver and metal case, were missing. I have never found out where the weapon was stored, though I assume it was at the state police headquarters. Now, at that time, I conducted a private search for Morris Winthrop. I hired a private investigator who found very little information other than that of a single 32-year-old man named Morris Winthrop, who has resided in New York City in 1877 until he went missing without a trace. All his property in Manhattan had been left behind. The police found no evidence of foul play. Now, after 19 years, I never found another reference to Morris Winthrop. This has become a bit of an obsession for me. I have hired other private investigators over the years, but nothing has been found. If Morris was a time traveler, I wonder if he'll contact me as he promised. Now, I do want to note, as I stated before, this is the final statement approved by MB. Now, could this be a case of time travel? I would have preferred more information, but MB is quite aware of how others would interpret his quest for Morris's identity and deposition. He asked me not to conduct a private inquiry. It seems his long-term investigation had ruffled the feathers of a few local and state officials over the years. Now, my late friend and colleague, Rosemary Ellen Golly, was intrigued by this account, and she looked into it as well as including it in one of her books. So, folks, that's the last account. So, do we have anything to talk about here? Any questions? Yeah, there are some pretty creepy ones. And look, if you have anything like that, or a time slip or glitch or anything, account that you'd like to send me, please feel free to send it to my email at lonstricklerfamsmonster.com. I really like these type of cases. I have gotten a few decent ones over the years. So, any questions, folks? Okay, well, okay, here we go. Dagnammit. Regarding the dashcam flying humanoid footage. Now, he's talking about the Wisconsin footage that was sent to me. You could see something large flying in the distance, but it could be anything. Does Wisconsin have a history of flying humanoids? Oh, absolutely. You know, a lot of these sightings related to the Chicago sightings were in Wisconsin. Now, this was up in northern Wisconsin, up near Lake Superior. So, I don't know what that was. Quite frankly, the MUFON investigator who sent this to me believes that it was some type of flying creature of some type. I don't know what it was. I just put it out there for everybody to look at and make their own determination. B3 Airspace. Lon, these time glitches are so odd and random. Do you think they pinpoint some people? I think possibly. I don't know. Until the technology ever becomes more prevalent or more understood, or, we do get some evidence as to actual time travel or time glitches, I don't know how to really answer that question. But, I think every person has some type of time glitch. If it's just a matter of minutes or so or an hour of missing time, I mean, there could be explanations for it, but quite frankly, I've gone through it. And, I've talked to a lot of people who've had these that are really convincing in their stories. So, it does happen. Okay, well, I want to thank each and all of you for watching and chatting this evening. If you donated, it's appreciated. Your support's what makes this all possible. So please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have an encounter report, please contact me at lawnstrickers@phantomsandmonsters.com. So until we meet next Friday night, I don't think we're going to have anything before that, but next Friday we'll have another show. So until then, you all have a safe week. And have a great weekend. And I will talk to you soon. Take care.